police chief in Rochester, New York, has announced his early retirement amid backlash over how the police department handled the case of Daniel Prude, a mentally ill man who actually died while being detained by Rochester police. Now, this incident actually happened in March, but the reason why it's making news today and the reason why there's so much backlash today is because footage of that arrest went public, and now people have a better idea of how Daniel Prude died. So what ended up happening was Daniel Prude was having some sort of episode. His brother was worried about him, called the cops hoping that they would help, and unfortunately quite the opposite happened. And this is a pretty common story. This is something that we've talked about a lot. And for anyone who thinks defunding the police or redirecting some of the police budget toward social workers who have expertise on this, you think that's stupid, understand that they would be utilized. Social workers and mental health professionals would be utilized in instances like this, and it would prevent people from dying. But let me give you some details on what we know so far. Rochester, New York Police Chief Singletary has submitted paperwork to retire days after saying he had no intention of stepping down amid protests over the death of Daniel Prude in police custody. Now, he did release a statement on why he's made this decision, and he remains defiant. He believes that his police department didn't do anything wrong. As a man of integrity, he writes, "I will not sit idly by while outside entities attempt to destroy my character. The events over the past week are an attempt to destroy my character and integrity." Pretty sure it's not about you. Like, pretty sure it's about a systemic issue we have in this country. And I want the audience to know what that footage looked like. This video is a little lengthy, but it gives you a full picture of what happened that night and why there's so much outrage. So let's take a quick look at that. And when we come back, we'll discuss. I want to warn you that this is incredibly graphic.
Attorneys for Prude's family providing CNN with edited body cam footage of the March 23rd incident that shows different angles of what happened. The video starts with police arriving on the scene after Prude's brother called them, saying Prude was experiencing a mental health episode. The footage shows an officer approach Prude, who was on the street naked.
Get on the ground. Put your hands behind your back. Behind your back.
Yes,
don't
sir.
move.
Yes.
Don't move.
Yes,
Chill
sir.
out, man. Don't move, all right, man?
Yes,
Just don't
sir.
move.
Yes, sir.
Prude complies with the officer's request and is then handcuffed.
Are you Daniel?
Yes, sir.
Daniel Prude?
Please let me get my money.
Daniel Prude?
Moments later, the footage shows Prude visibly agitated for several minutes, yelling at officers and moving around on the pavement.
Jesus Christ, I pray, man. Let me go back. Give me them handcuffs, bro.
Then 3 minutes after the initial encounter, officers place a spit sock over Prude's head to minimize exposure after they say he was spitting. It distresses Prude further.
Yo, get the away from me. And Jesus.
He continues moving on the ground with the spit sock on his head, and the officers demand he lay still.
Give me the gun.
Stay
Give
down.
me the gun. Give me the handcuff.
Stay
Give
down.
me the handcuff.
And when he does not comply and appears to try to stand, 3 officers get on the ground to physically restrain him and hold him to the ground.
I'm already in it.
Trying to kill me.
One officer has his knee on Prude's back, and the other is holding his head to the pavement while the spit sock remains on his head.
Another officer can be seen putting his weight on Prude's head, who appears to be struggling to breathe. During the struggle, the officers realize Prude is spitting and appears to have vomited. Soon after, the paramedics begin to assist.
No, it's freezing out here. He's been out naked for 30 minutes.
He feels pretty cold.
The EMTs instruct the officers to roll him over.
Oh, no.
Start CPR.
After performing CPR for about 2 minutes, Prude is placed on a gurney and put in the ambulance. Prude was pronounced brain dead upon arriving at the hospital and died on March 30th.
So, look, obviously he didn't need to die. Obviously, police are not trained to deal with people who are having a mental health episode. But who do you call? You know, I can't imagine what his brother is feeling right now because his brother needed help. And, you know, rather than having a system in place that allows for well-paid mental health experts to respond to calls like this, people have no option other than calling the cops, and it's really risky to do that, as we know in this case and another case that I'll outline in just a second. But Nando, I wanted you to jump in.
I mean, it's absolutely horrifying. I mean, it's hard to overstate just how corrosive to a society it is to not be able to rely on your police for just some basic things like that, like you said, like calling the police sometimes like is something that you need to do for whatever reason, like there's gonna be problems, but to this idea that like you're putting people's lives at risk by doing that, it's such a fundamentally basic thing that we should demand and expect at such a bare minimum to even live in a functioning society, is to just have like police that's not gonna just murder you indiscriminately, like if or someone else, like if you call the cops on them, or like again, like there could be a myriad problems, not like those viral videos of like a white woman, calling the cops on a black guy for grilling outside or something. But sometimes there are legitimate reasons to call the police, and this idea that that you're just actually putting people's lives at risk by doing that is, it's crazy. And looking at something like that and it's horrifying.
It is horrifying. There was so obviously in LA, as many have heard, there's a big problem with homelessness, and many people on the streets, living on the streets, have mental health issues.
Yeah.
And fairly recently, like a few months ago, I went on a bike ride with my husband, and there was a homeless woman who was very clearly mentally ill. Yeah. And she starts coming for me, and I'm like, she's coming for me. I know it. I see it. I'm on my bike. I'm panicking. I don't know what to do. And I'm stopped at a red light. And luckily, all she did was she started yelling all this profanity at me and like accused my husband of effing her, which was the funny part, right? But then
he used the Trump defense. You're not my type.
She took the fountain drink and like threw it at me. And I was scared, because I didn't know if it was just gonna stop there. And I grabbed my phone because I thought maybe I should call someone. And then I'm like, wait, what am I doing? No, I'm not gonna call the cops. That's crazy. And the reason why it's crazy is because, again, they are not experts in dealing with people who have mental health issues. And we have a dangerous cocktail, especially in places like LA. You have homelessness. You have a large population of homeless people who have mental health issues that go untreated. But if you look at the country overall, I mean, can you imagine dealing with this healthcare system if you have a mental health issue?
Yeah.
People are not getting the help and the treatment they need. So you have the brutality when it comes to police. You have, the lack of mental health care, the lack of affordable housing. It's just a recipe for disaster, and we're seeing the consequences of it. Now, the police chief, who's decided to retire early, also said, Singletary is his name, said he was stepping down after serving the department and community for 20 years with honor, pride, and the highest integrity. So it's just more of what we can expect, right? Just like this utter defiance, unwillingness to ever take any accountability. And that is why people have a difficult time accepting this few bad apples argument, because if you have a system that enables the kind of behavior we've been seeing and the brutality we've been seeing, then it's not about a few bad apples, it's about the system and how it empowers police to act the way they do in a lot of the cases we talk about. By the way, Prude was suffering from an acute manic psychotic episode at the time of the arrest, and that's according to a lawsuit that's been filed against the police department. The lawsuit also says, as shown by the officers' worn camera recordings, when they used force against Mr. Prude, he was handcuffed, naked, and sitting on the ground with a spit sock over his head. He obviously posed no threat to the safety of the officers or anyone else. Prude's encounter with police was captured on officers' body-worn cameras, and Tamashay Prude alleges the video footage was unlawfully kept from the family for months. As I mentioned earlier, this incident happened in March, and we didn't know about it until recently. The suit alleges a cover-up stating that Singletary, the police chief, told Warren that Prude had an apparent drug overdose. So although there is a civil suit filed against the police department, I also want to note that the Attorney General, the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, has announced that she's forming a grand jury to investigate the death of Daniel Prude. We'll see how that plays out. Hopefully there's some justice. But I also want to emphasize that this is not an isolated incident. This is something that impacts people with mental health issues. And while it disproportionately impacts Black people and people of color, the truth is no one is safe from this type of brutality, as we learned from another story involving a teenage boy who dealt with brutal force and luckily is alive, but almost died. Let's take a look at that video.
Golda Barton says that she called for help, and she says that her son was having a hard time coping with her going back to work for the first time in nearly a year.
I said, look, he's unarmed. He doesn't have anything. He just gets mad and he starts yelling and screaming and he's a kid. He's trying to get attention. He doesn't know how to regulate. And I hear, get down on the ground. Get down on the ground. Get on the ground. Bam, 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 bam.
Barton says her son has nerve damage and injuries from the shooting. Police say that the boy was making threats to people with a weapon, allegedly. It's not clear if he had a weapon.
Yeah, based on what this story appears to really be about, there was no weapon. A spokesperson for the Salt Lake City Police Department told CNN on Tuesday that he could not speak specifically to whether the boy had a weapon or what the officers' perceived threats were, and that those questions will be determined by an investigation. Let me just tell you something. If he had a weapon, we would know that he had a weapon.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's 13-year-old boy, right? You know, it's horrifying. I mean, you mentioned the story you had with the homeless woman. I was walking down my street in Venice about 6 or 7 months ago, or more, like a year ago, and I just saw this like young homeless kid. He must have been like 17 or 18, just walking down the street, and he just collapsed, like he just fell over, like as if he, like a tree falling, after you saw it down. And I was like, oh. So like I ran up to him, and he was clearly like overdosing or something. Like he had taken something that was, and I'm sitting there with my phone, and I'm like, do I call 911? You know, like
yeah. What do you?
I hesitated. I mean, I ended up calling 911, and they ended up showing up. And the way they treated this kid, who was clearly was so violent and over the top. I mean, nothing happened to him. Like he was like they ended up putting him in an ambulance and driving him away. But before the ambulance got there, the way they were like treating him, this guy who was clearly like maybe possibly dying, was so over the top violent that I was just like, I'm staring and I'm like, what? How in any way is this a way to deal with someone who, like, he's not posing any threat. He could barely stand up. He had completely collapsed. And it's like, yeah, I mean, how can you not trust the most basic services of your government to handle a situation like that without possibly killing someone? I mean, it's so horrifying. I mean, just watching that woman's reaction, it's just, you know, think about the effects it has on society as a whole. It's crazy.
Yeah, imagine being a mother who made that call. Yeah. And your son is now in the hospital. I'm so happy he's alive. I hope he makes a full recovery. It's just such a heartbreaking and disgusting story. But this is what the protests are about. Despite what the Trump administration will have you believe, the protests are about changing this brutality, changing this system.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.